Marry me today. I said it in a whisper, in the cramped back office of the city registry where the smell of ink and old paper clung to the walls. My driver, Seth, stared at me like I'd set fire to the ground we stood on. Amara, he said slowly, you're the CEO of a company that employs hundreds of people. I live in a one-room place behind my uncle's repair shop. This is real, I cut in, and it has to be secret for now. He exhaled, eyes flicking to the corridor as if my board chair might be hiding behind the filing cabinet. Then he pulled a small brass compass from his pocket, the metal worn smooth by time. He pressed it into my palm. My father's, he said. It kept him steady when the roads were bad. If we do this, we follow true north, no matter what storms come. I closed my fingers around the compass and nodded. We signed. No flowers, no music, just the echo of the clerk's stamp and a quiet promise we had to hide. 3 years earlier, I had taken over Lumina Harvest, a home and personal care company my late mother began in a tiny kitchen with cast iron pots and recipes scribbled on the backs of envelopes. Now, we had a production plant outside Johannesburg, contracts in 3 countries, and a brand people recognized. We also had enemies. Our CFO, Kellen, wore Italian shoes and a permanent smirk. He called the drivers the fleet, like they were a pile of metal instead of people who moved our lifeblood from plant to store. He had the board's ear. He had the press on speed dial. He had a way of reminding me, quietly and often, that I was young to hold so much power. Seth came into my life when the company van broke down on a highway shoulder, and he stopped in a battered backy with a toolbox and a smile that made the stress lift off my chest for one suspended second. Pop the hood, he'd said. Looks like your radiator's weeping. He'd say things like that, gentle, almost poetic, about ugly problems. He started driving for Lumina 2 weeks later. He learned our routes in days, not months. He learned my days in hours, not weeks. He noticed when I drank my coffee too fast and forgot a sandwich. He noticed when Kellen's smirk turned into a plan. You never look him in the eyes, Seth said one night, waiting outside the plant while I reviewed a vendor's invoice under the flicker of an office lamp. Because I might say something I can't unsay, I told him. He grinned, then sobered. Let me drive tonight. You look like you've been arguing with numbers all day. He'd drive, I'd breathe, and in the quiet of those late drives across the city, between billboards and the outlines of warehouses, the shape of my heart changed. We kept our marriage secret because my mother's closest friend, Auntie T, sat on the board and believed love was something you scheduled after profit. Protect the brand, she would say, pressing her coral lipstick to my cheek. The brand is the family now. The night we married, I lay awake with Seth's hand across my waist and the compass on the nightstand, a coin-sized moon. I had something the brand couldn't manage. A person who looked at me as if my worth existed apart from the numbers on a spreadsheet. The scandal broke on a Monday morning in late June. I had just announced a new partnership with a major retail chain when a gossip page posted, Lumina CEO secretly tied to her driver? Company insiders whisper the romance could drive the business into a ditch. By noon, a second post named Seth. By 1, a third piece added pictures, grainy shots of us leaving the plant together at night, a photograph of my hand on his forearm as I stepped over a puddle. By 2, Kellen forwarded me a link with a single line. This is a reputational risk. At 3, the board met without me. At 3:30, they called me in. Is it true? Auntie T asked without her usual softness. Please understand the optics, Amara. I looked at the faces around the long table, the polished wood reflecting their shiny concern. I knew what they saw, power, scandal. But I also knew what I had, promise, trust. It is true, I said, voice steady. I married Seth. He is my husband. Kellen's smile was patient, sympathetic. We wish you told us. The market can be unkind. The market will be fine, I said. Our work is good. Perception drives value, he murmured, eyes sliding toward a camera at the end of the room. We didn't know it then, but Kellen had already moved pieces we couldn't see. Our credit line, renewed annually with the bank where Kellen's college roommate worked, was flagged for review. A rumor whispered that our new partnership had concerns about management. A supplier suddenly demanded payment terms we hadn't agreed to. It felt like finding water in our gas tank, one cough at a time. That night, I walked into our small apartment lightheaded with anger and fatigue. Seth was at the stove, stirring something fragrant. He turned, read my face, and killed the flame. "They're coming for the company," I said. He leaned his hip against the counter and waited. He had that kind of patience that made you hear your own voice better. They called it optics. They called it perception. Kellen sent me links like he wasn't the one feeding them. "Then he is," Seth said simply. "So we chart a route around him." I laughed once harsh. "Chart a route? This isn't traffic. This is a boardroom with contracts and debt covenants and..." He reached behind him and put the brass compass in my palm. "True north," he said softly. "We only get lost if we let him spin us." "True north is payroll this Friday," I said. "True north is trucks that move when they ought to move, and people who believe they'll still have jobs next month." "Then we move the trucks," he said. By Thursday morning, the bank called our note. We had 2 weeks to pay down a chunk of debt or face a freeze in credit. Without that line, we couldn't purchase raw materials. Without raw materials, we couldn't fill orders. Without orders, we couldn't make payroll the following month. Kellen suggested we pause operations to reassess, which is how men like him say cut jobs. At noon, a fire ripped through Unit B in the plant, a small blaze in a packaging area that could have been catastrophic if not for a fast-acting team lead. The fire inspector's initial report said the likely cause was a faulty outlet. I didn't believe it, not with everything else failing at once. By sunset, 3 trucks were parked outside the plant with loads that should have been delivered hours ago. The port had a backlog, and we were low priority. Every problem became every other problem. At 9, I called an emergency meeting and told the staff the truth. "If we do this right," I said, "we make payroll. We keep our reputation. We prove that this company is more than a headline. If we do this wrong, we let people who don't care about us decide our fate." Seth stood in the back, wearing a plain tee and the look he wore when a road narrowed. When the meeting ended, he waited until the room emptied and then said, "Let me run logistics. Just for now. The official channels are jammed, but the city isn't just official channels." "You drive trucks," I said. I heard the bias in my own voice and hated it instantly. He didn't flinch. "I know every loading dock manager by first name and favorite soccer club. I know which security guards care if we bring them a hot coffee at 2 in the morning. I know who runs night shift at the port and how to move our pallets from the middle of the pile to the front without breaking rules. I know routes Waze won't tell you about and which back roads flood in a light rain because the culvert is blocked by plastic bags. Your maps are perfect on paper. Mine are real." I stared at him. I saw the man I loved, and for the first time, I saw the leader I had overlooked because the world taught me that leadership wore a suit. "What do you need?" I asked. "A phone list. The authority to call people without clearing it through Kellen. 3 days. And your promise you won't fire anyone without looking them in the eye and telling them why." "You have all of that," I said. "And one more thing." I slid my mother's fountain pen across the table toward him. "Sign whatever you need to sign." He looked at the pen and then back at me. "We're going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable," he said. "Good," I replied. "Comfort got us here." The next 72 hours were noise and motion. Seth didn't sleep. He turned the break room into a makeshift command center, a whiteboard covered in arrows and stoplights and names. Zadwa, who could open Dock 3 after midnight. Poppy, whose cousin ran forklifts on the east lot. Mr. Dubé, who would lend us 3 flatbeds if we could replace 2 tires and pay cash. Seth sent our drivers in pairs for safety and morale, and he rode along on the grimmest runs, a map in his head and the compass on the dash. He replaced a failing alternator himself in the middle of a freight yard, using tools borrowed from a night shift mechanic. He bribed no one, he didn't need to. He carried coffee for gatekeepers and respect for men in orange vests who were used to being ignored. He found efficiencies none of our consultants had found because he'd been listening to the people who did the work. He also found sabotage. At 2 in the morning on the second night, a driver named Sia sent a video of a man in a dark jacket lingering by the pump controls near the back lot. The man looked up once, face caught in the glow of a security light before he turned and vanished. Seth froze the frame, zoomed, and then swore under his breath. That's Kellen's assistant, he said, eyes going hard. The one who always wears cufflinks with the little globes. At 9, I asked Kellen to meet me in my office. Seth stood at the window, arms folded, as I pressed play on Sia's video. Kellen watched himself framed by bad decisions and low light. That doesn't prove anything, he said quickly. Anyone can wear cufflinks. This is beneath you, Amara. What did the bank promise you? I asked quietly. And what did you promise them? He bristled. You think you can run a company on grit and romance? Numbers matter. Perception matters. You lost control of the narrative the day you decided to marry my husband? I said, yes, I did that. I also decided to keep the jobs of people whose names you never bothered to learn. He glanced at Seth, dismissive. Your logistics experiment will buy you a week. Then the board will do what it should have done months ago. I leaned in. Mr. Dovey from the bank? He and I just spoke. He told me you recommended an alternative steward to shepherd Lumina through a sale. You, Kellen. You recommended yourself. He opened his mouth and closed it again. You're suspended pending investigation, I said evenly. Turn in your badges. Security will escort you to collect your things. My voice didn't shake because I had practiced not shaking in rooms like this since I was 22 years old, and my mother first handed me a payroll report with a minus sign. Kellen left with an expression like the world had failed him by following its own rules. In the hallway, Seth let out a breath he'd been holding for 3 days. We're not out yet, he said. But if we keep moving, we'll make Friday. We made Friday. Trucks rolled where trucks needed to roll. Our new retail partner, nervous as a deer in headlights, received their first shipment on time and posted a photo of Lumina products lined up under bright store lights. The caption said, right on schedule. I could have cried just for those 3 words. Inside the plant, the small fire became a rallying cry, not a funeral hymn. Workers brought in their own fans to push the smell out of Unit B. Someone hung a hand-lettered sign on the break room corkboard that read, True North equals people. I don't know who wrote it. It looked like a dozen hands had traced the letters. Kellen didn't go quietly. He hired a PR firm, claimed I was compromised, claimed nepotism, claimed anything that glittered on a headline. But the headlines met the wrong story. Seth was everywhere in the building, helping a forklift operator recalibrate a finicky sensor with a strip of aluminum foil, running a team huddle with notes scribbled in block letters on a cardboard flap, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the accounting team to translate driver scrawls on delivery sheets into clean data. He didn't act like a hero. He acted like a person who knew things because he did the work long enough to see where the bones were. People followed him without looking up from their tasks, like sailors who adjust by heart when a captain shifts the wheel. The board called an emergency meeting the following Tuesday. Auntie T sat on the far end, her coral lipstick a little smeared at the edge like she'd rubbed her mouth too hard. She looked tired. She also looked proud. We've investigated the fire and the pump controls, she said, voice formal. The footage correlates with a manual override at a time when only 4 individuals had access. Mr. Kellen has resigned. She paused. We've also reviewed our contingency performance. Logistics improved by 9% under Mr. Seth Adeyemi's temporary leadership. Costs fell, if you can believe it, because people were asked before they were told. I stared at her. You're not firing me? Annie T's mouth curled. I was never going to fire my girl for falling in love with a good man. Her voice softened. I wanted you to tell me. But I was young once too. I remember what I was willing to hide to protect what I had. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be sorry, she said. Be bold. She shuffled her papers, then looked at Seth. Mr. Adeyemi, if you accept, the board proposes a newly created role, Chief of Field Operations and Community Logistics. It looks unusual on an org chart. So, does what you did last week. I'd like our org chart to reflect reality. Seth's face did a complicated thing I would spend years learning to read. Stunned, humbled, ready. He nodded once. It comes with guardrails, a board member said quickly. We maintain procurement integrity. No special favors. We document every handshake. I'm good with that, Seth said. A record shows respect. I felt something ease in my spine. A pressure I had carried since the day I took my mother's pen and signed my name next to hers on a line labeled Chief Executive Officer. We announced our marriage the next day. I wore a simple white shirt and jeans. Seth wore a navy jacket he bought secondhand and had cleaned so carefully I swore the stitches breathed. We stood in the sunlight outside the building that held our history and faced a small crowd of cameras and faces and a sea of employees on their lunch break. 3 years ago, I said, I married a man who knew more about the living map of this city than any consultant I've ever hired. I kept that marriage private because I was afraid of opinions. I am not afraid anymore. Seth took my hand. His palm was rough and warm and steady. We love this company, he said. We love the people who make it. Last week proved something we knew but hadn't said out loud. The future belongs to the builders, the drivers, the packers, the ones who move things and fix things and figure things out when nobody's watching. Love doesn't disqualify someone from leadership, I added. It teaches it. A reporter shouted a question about nepotism. I nodded at him. We're building structures that outlast any one person. That includes roles defined by skill, not by who sits at the head table. Our team wrote the playbook with their hands. We're just catching up. That afternoon, the gossip page posted a new headline. Driver to director? Inside Lumina's unusual rise. For the first time, the comments trended toward hope. Success looks loud in the newspapers. Inside a life, it tends to arrive quietly, like the moment you realize your shoulders aren't clenched anymore. We rehired 2 drivers who had left during the worst of it because their hours were cut unpredictably. Under Seth, routes made sense, lives made sense. We invested in a daycare space on site with sliding rates because one of our best line supervisors nearly quit when her childcare fell through, and Seth said, if we can deliver pallets across a stormed-in back road at 2 a.m, we can figure out how to make it possible for a mother to work her shift. We started a program called North Star that offered drivers training in inventory systems, budgeting, and leadership. We promoted from within so often that the word within felt like a promise, not a consolation prize. We also made mistakes. We rolled out a new routing app that crashed on older phones and had to eat the cost of upgrading 22 handsets. We partnered with a small supplier who couldn't meet demand and had to pivot in a week. But we made mistakes on our feet, not on our knees. Kellen tried a lawsuit. It fizzled. He tried a podcast. It sputtered. He tried calling the bank again. The bank put him on hold. In our quiet moments, on the couch, on a sidewalk, in the middle of a doorway, Seth would take the compass from the bowl where we kept our keys and turn it in his fingers, watching the needle steady. He never stopped being surprised that it still worked. That felt like a lesson. On our first anniversary as a public couple, what our HR director cheerfully called the press iversary, we held a small celebration in the plant cafeteria. There were paper plates and grocery store cakes and a playlist somebody's kid made. A forklift operator named Queen sang a verse of something that made my throat close. People spoke, not to flatter, but to mark a thing: we were still here. After, I stood by the loading dock while the evening shifted toward night. The air held the kind of soft hum that only exists when machines rest and people start thinking about home. Seth came up beside me and slipped the compass into my hand. I want you to have it, he said. I already have it, I said, smiling. It lives in our bowl. No, he said. I mean as yours. On your desk, not near the door. Your mother's pen lives there on purpose. Put this next to it. I turned the compass over. On the back, in a circle, a phrase was engraved, the metal worn but the words clear. Find your true north. I found mine, I said. He brushed a curl off my cheek. You kept it. We stood there for a long time, watching nothing urgent happen. Those are my favorite minutes now, the ones with no plot. People always ask about the dramatic days, the scandal, the board meeting, the bank. They rarely ask about the moments that taught us how to make the dramatic days survivable. The sandwich he wrapped and left on my desk when I forgot lunch, the text he sent our night shift crew when the soccer match ran late, the driver who left a bag of mangoes on the break room table with a note, take what you need. If you want to build a company that survives a storm, you build it on those moments, not the headlines. 2 years later, another crisis came. A flood closed 2 of the main arteries to the city for a week. Shelves emptied in 3 days. People panicked. The news ran footage of cars turned into islands. Our distribution was cut in half overnight, and we had a commitment to keep essential products on store shelves through a government relief program. That commitment had our logo on it. It also had our names. Kellen wasn't there to smirk. No one was there to sabotage. The crisis didn't need a villain. It had gravity. Seth took one look at the maps on my screen and shook his head. The roads aren't the only path, he said. We have river. We have rails. We have feet. Feet, I said, half laughing, half terrified. Community couriers, he replied. We pay fairly, insure properly, document everything. We set up pickup hubs at clinics, schools, churches, places people can walk to. We use small vehicles to reach them, then hand to hand from there. It's a relay. We don't wait for roads to dry. He said it like he'd been thinking it for years. Maybe he had. We assembled it in days. We borrowed inflatable boats from a nonprofit that ran swimming programs and retrofitted them with harnesses for crates. We contracted 2 light rail pallets for overnight hauls and moved at dawn. We hired 200 temporary community couriers and trained them in a day. Clipboards, QR codes, foam vests. Insurance tried to tell us no. Our legal team found the clause that said yes. We paid a premium. It was worth it. Seth stood at a folding table under a gymnasium's fluorescent lights, handing vests to grandmothers and teenagers and men who'd never had a job with a badge before, but wore theirs like a medal. A woman with a newborn strapped to her chest folded boxes like she'd been waiting to be asked to do something that mattered. We delivered. We delivered enough that the relief program director visited and wept into a napkin, saying she'd never seen a private company move like a neighborhood. We delivered enough that a journalist wrote a headline I cut out and taped to my wall. Love runs logistics. After, when the roads reopened and the water pulled back and the city stretched its stiff limbs, we packed the boats and returned them with thank you notes and a check. We kept the vests. You never know. People said Seth saved the company, and I nodded because it was true. People said Amara saved the company, and I nodded because that was true too. The more honest version is this. The company saved itself when we learned how to ask people what they knew and then believe them. I tell this story at graduation sometimes when a university invites me to stand at a podium and pretend I have advice. The students laugh at the part about the compass. They lean in at the part about the bank. They sigh when I say the word love like it's a business strategy. They always want the simple lesson. I try to give them the honest one. Here it is. If you want a love that lasts and a company that matters, marry your true north. Not a person with a title you're supposed to respect, but someone who will stand with you at a loading dock and point to the thing that needs doing right now. And then this is the critical part. Listen to them as if your life depends on it, because one day it will. On my desk, there are 2 objects my hands touch before I start any tough day. My mother's fountain pen and Seth's compass. One is for signing, one is for steering. Neither works without the other. We still argue. We still miss each other in a room sometimes. We still remember to apologize. On our fridge, there's a sticky note that says, in Seth's tidy block letters, people first, then product, then profit. Underneath it, in my looping hand, all 3 or none. People love the ending of our story, the board's apology, the scandal turned lesson, the flood turned relay. But if you're listening for the piece that changed me, it's this. A man who could have stayed a driver chose to become a builder because the woman he loved finally learned to see him clearly and then moved out of his way. The day we moved our headquarters into a building with windows that threw light onto the floor in clean squares, Seth stood with me in the lobby before the letters went up. Lumina, and pressed his forehead to mine. You know what I'm proud of, he asked. That we didn't quit. He smiled. That you didn't spend your life trying to convince rooms that didn't love you to love you. You built a room where love was the first criterion for entry. The rest followed. We stepped back as the last letter clicked into place. It looked inevitable. Nothing about it was. That's the truth behind every story that sounds like a miracle. It's 1,000 ordinary acts, done unglamorously in the same direction. I keep the compass in my pocket on hard days. Sometimes I take it out and watch the needles settle, the quiet little answer in a world that shouts. I think of my mother stirring oils in a pot over a stove in a rented kitchen, of Seth replacing an alternator at 2 a.m. with borrowed tools, of a woman with a baby folding boxes like she'd never folded anything so carefully in her life. True North is not a destination. It's a practice. And love, if you do it right, teaches you how to practice.